Why was a prototype chip in your bag? The question sliced through the silence like a blade. Keisha froze mid-step, her mop handle trembling in her gloved hands. The boardroom lights glared off the glass table as Ethan, the CEO, stared her down with a mix of disgust and accusation. In his hand, her small leather notebook. She hadn't even realized it had fallen from her pocket. Inside were pages filled with circuit sketches, neat rows of formulas, and handwritten notes in blue ink. He flipped it open like he'd just uncovered stolen treasure. "This isn't your kind of material," he sneered. "These designs belong to my company. So tell me, where did you get this?" Her voice came out trembling, but clear. "It's mine, sir. I drew those diagrams. I built that prototype before I even worked here." Laughter echoed from the doorway. A couple of white interns, whispering loud enough to wound. "Caught red-handed," one said. "Guess you wanted a promotion," the other chuckled. Keisha's chest tightened. She looked down at the floor, the same tile she scrubbed every night. "Please, sir, I didn't steal anything." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You people always have a story." He slammed the notebook onto the table, so hard the sound echoed like a slap. Her hands shook. Her eyes burned. "Security," he barked. "Get her out." The guard hesitated, but one glare from the CO made him move. Keisha reached for the notebook one last time. The edge of the table scraped her wrist, leaving a red line across her brown skin. "Please," she whispered, "that notebook is all I have left from my husband. He helped me build it." But Ethan didn't flinch. "Out," he said coldly. As the guard led her away, she caught a reflection in the glass wall. Eyes red, uniform damp from sweat and shame. She whispered under her breath, almost like a vow, "One day you'll know the truth." Outside, rain streaked the lobby glass. She stepped into the night, her shoes soaked, her heart pounding, a storm breaking quietly inside her. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The morning air felt heavier than usual. Keisha sat near the back of the city bus, her eyes fixed on the raindrops racing each other down the fog window. Her uniform was still damp from last night, and the scrape on her wrist stung with every movement. The bus engine hummed beneath her, but her thoughts were louder, looping Ethan's voice again and again. "You people always have a story." The words burned deeper than the wound. Across the aisle, an old black man looked up from his newspaper. "You look like you've been through something, daughter." Keisha forced a smile. "Just a long night." He nodded slowly. "Keep your head up. God, don't let the truth stay buried forever." She smiled again, but this time it reached her eyes. She needed to hear that. When the bus stopped at her block, she stepped off, clutching her small canvas bag. Inside it, her resignation letter, unpaid bills, and a photo of her daughter Zuri, missing a front tooth, holding up a cardboard robot. That little smile was her reason to keep going. Inside their small apartment, the smell of toast and cinnamon filled the air. Zuri sat cross-legged on the couch, hair in two messy buns, clutching her toy robot. "Mama, you're home early." Keisha hesitated, forcing a soft laugh. "Yeah, baby, early today." Zuri's smile faded. "You didn't look happy. Did they make you mad again?" Keisha sat beside her, pulling the girl into her arms. "They didn't understand me, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay." Zuri tilted her head. "Can we build another robot? A better one?" Keisha chuckled, brushing a tear away. "We will, baby, but this time, no one's taking it from us." As her daughter giggled and ran to fetch the broken robot, Keisha's eyes drifted to the corner of the room, a small toolbox, a few wires, an old circuit board she'd once kept for hope. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "I'm not done yet. They may have fired me, but they haven't silenced me." Outside, the sun broke faintly through the clouds, a weak light, but light nonetheless. Keisha picked up her old notebook's photocopy, smudged and worn, and began sketching again. Each line on the paper felt like a pulse, the first heartbeat of a plan. Ethan Langford sat in his glass-walled office, fingers tapping against the surface of the old notebook he had confiscated the night before. The rain hadn't stopped, and the city skyline blurred behind the glass like a guilty conscience. He should have moved on. Fired staff came and went every week. But something about this one, that woman's eyes, refused to leave his mind. He flipped the notebook open again. The sketches weren't random. They were technical, deliberate, microchip schematics labeled with notes he could barely follow. Each page carried faint initials at the bottom corner, KW. He frowned. He'd seen those initials before years ago when his company bought out a small startup called NovaCore. He buzzed his assistant. Carter, pull up the acquisition files for NovaCore, especially their early prototypes. I want everything on record. While his assistant searched, Ethan leaned back, uneasy. Her words echoed again. I built that prototype before I even worked here. Meanwhile, across town, Keisha sat at a flickering library computer. Her daughter was at school, and she had spent her last few dollars printing out a few old email threads from years ago, back when she worked for a local tech startup before NovaCore was absorbed into Langford Industries. Her pulse quickened as she searched public patent archives. She typed, NovaCore Neural Chip Prototype, 2012. The result popped up, patent owned by Langford Industries. Inventors listed, Ethan Langford, Jason Moore, and then, under source design draft, KW uncredited. Her eyes widened. Her initials were still buried in the data. Not erased, just hidden. She whispered under her breath, You left my fingerprints on your empire. Back at the office, Ethan's assistant entered holding a thin folder. You're not going to believe this, he said, dropping the documents on the desk. Inside were old photographs, a small team in a cluttered garage, smiling, holding up a crude circuit board. In the center stood a young black woman with curly hair and oil-stained hands, Keisha Williams. Ethan's stomach twisted. She actually built it. Carter frowned. Seems like it. Her name was removed after the acquisition. NDA. Standard practice back then. Ethan closed the folder slowly. His reflection stared back at him from the glass wall. A man living off someone else's work. He turned toward the city, his jaw tight. Find me her file. I want to know everything they buried. At that same moment, Keisha printed the patent proof, folded it, and slid it into her bag. The tremor in her hands wasn't fear this time. It was power. For 12 years, they'd taken her voice. Now, she finally had proof that it still existed. She whispered, steady and quiet, Time to make them remember. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. Keisha stood outside the small cafe near Fifth Avenue, clutching the printed patent page like a lifeline. Across from her sat Mr. Briggs, an older black engineer who had once worked beside her during the early NovaCore days. His eyes softened when he saw her. It's been a long time, Keisha, he said quietly. Too long, she replied. I found proof. They never deleted my initials, just buried them. Briggs took the paper, squinting at the faint KW in the corner. I remember this draft, he said. You made the neural core design stable. Without you, that prototype would have burned out in testing. Her voice trembled. Then why didn't anyone speak up? He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried years of regret. Back then, the board wanted clean optics. A young black woman, as the lead inventor, didn't fit their image. Keisha stared at the table, her reflection trembling in her coffee. They stole my life's work and made me clean their floors. Briggs reached across, touching her hand. You still have something more powerful than they do. What's that? The truth and proof. She nodded slowly. Then it's time to use both. Across town, Ethan sat at his desk with the same folder in front of him. The photo of young Keisha haunted him. The confidence in her smile, the spark of brilliance that built the very chip now earning him billions. He picked up the phone. Carter set a meeting with legal. I want every name tied to the NovaCore buyout, especially whoever wrote those NDAs. When the team arrived, his tone was sharp. We silenced someone who built our foundation. That ends now. One of the older lawyers, Thomas, scoffed. With all due respect, sir, You can't rewrite history. Ethan leaned forward, eyes cold. Watch me. At that exact moment, Keisha walked into the courthouse lobby, her bag heavy with evidence and her heartbeat steady. She wasn't there to sue. Not yet. She was there to warn them, to show them that the janitor they humiliated wasn't invisible anymore. She whispered to herself as she entered, "They'll remember my name before this week is over." The automatic doors closed behind her with a soft hiss, like a stage curtain rising on a reckoning long overdue. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Long glass walls trapped the tension inside like steam under a lid. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by something rougher, guilt. The same executives who once praised him for innovation now looked at him with irritation, even fear. "Gentlemen," he began, voice firm, "we made a mistake 12 years ago. A mistake that built this company's fortune." A murmur rippled across the room. Thomas, the company's lead counsel, folded his arms. "With all due respect, sir, I hope you're not referring to that janitor incident. It's handled." Quietly, Ethan's eyes hardened. "Her name is Keisha Williams, and she's not just a janitor. She was the architect of the original Nova Core chip." The room fell silent. A young board member whispered, "That can't be true." Ethan slid the old folder across the table. Inside, patent records, signed buyout papers, and one yellow photo. Keisha in that garage, holding the prototype. "It is true," Ethan said, "and every page here proves we erased her." Thomas gave a slow, dry chuckle. "You're thinking like a man, not a CEO. You admit that, and this company's stock will crash. Investors don't reward guilt." Ethan leaned forward. "Investors didn't build this empire. She did." Across town, Keisha sat at her kitchen table with Mr. Briggs, stacks of printed documents spread out between them. Her old laptop buzzed as she opened a draft email to Langford Industries' ethics department. "I'm sending it," she said quietly. "You sure?" Briggs asked. "They silenced me once. Not again." Her message was short but sharp. Evidence attached, NDA references, and one line at the end. "The woman you fired was the woman who built your foundation." Back in the boardroom, Ethan's phone buzzed. The screen flashed her name, Keisha Williams. He hesitated, staring at it while Thomas smirked. "If you answer that call, you'll destroy your career." Ethan exhaled, slow and steady. "Then maybe it's time I built a new one." He pressed accept. The room went dead silent as her voice came through the speaker, calm, low, but filled with power. "Mr. Langford, I think it's time you faced the woman behind your success." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. board auditorium." He hung up, then turned to the room. "We'll tell the truth, publicly." Thomas slammed a hand on the table. "You'll tank the company." Ethan met his stare, unblinking. "Then we rebuild it, this time on honesty." As he walked out, every executive stayed frozen, caught between fear and the weight of a conscience they'd ignored too long. Down in her apartment, Keisha folded the patent copy, slipped it into her bag, and looked at her daughter's photo. "They wanted silence," she whispered, "but they're about to get my voice." The next morning, Langford Industries' main auditorium was packed. Employees filled every seat, their whispers bouncing off the walls like static. The company's logo glowed bright blue on the massive screen behind the stage. Ethan stood backstage, his heart thudding harder than any board meeting he'd ever faced. In his hand was the same notebook he'd once ripped from Keisha's grasp. Now it felt heavier, like it carried 12 years of silence. Carter leaned close. "Sir, the press is here. You sure about this?" Ethan nodded. Completely. He stepped out onto the stage. The murmurs died instantly. Cameras clicked. Executives from the front row exchanged nervous glances. He took a deep breath and began. "Some of you were here when something shameful happened in this building a few nights ago. A woman was humiliated in front of her peers. And worse, she was fired for telling the truth." He paused, scanning the crowd. No one moved. "That woman's name is Keisha Williams. And 12 years ago, before any of us took credit for this company's breakthrough, She built the very prototype that made Langford Industries what it is today. A wave of shock rolled through the room. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. From the back, the doors opened. Keisha walked in, calm and steady, her chin lifted, her daughter's necklace shining faintly under the lights. Every step echoed through the silence. Ethan turned toward her, voice softer now. "Miss Williams, I owe you a public apology, and more than that, your rightful place in history." He gestured to the screen behind him. The image changed, a grainy old photo. Keisha in an overcourt garage, oil on her hands, fire in her eyes. The next slide showed her name in bold. Keisha Williams, lead engineer, neural core prototype. Applause started small, hesitant, then grew. It filled the room like thunder. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Keisha stepped up to the microphone, voice clear and even. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came because stories like mine are too common. You see, credit isn't just about ego. It's about truth, about teaching little girls who look like me that their work matters." The applause swelled again. Even Thomas, the smug lawyer, looked down at the floor. "I spent 12 years cleaning the floors of the same company I helped build," she continued. "But maybe that was fate, because when you start at the bottom, you learn how strong the foundation really is." Ethan looked at her with something close to shame and respect. He stepped closer and handed her the old notebook. "It's yours," he said simply. She took it, hands trembling, not from fear, but from justice finally arriving. The crowd rose again, louder this time, genuine. The cameras flashed, but Keisha didn't smile for them. She turned, glanced at the audience, and said one last line before leaving the stage. "Truth doesn't die in silence. It waits for moments like this." As she walked backstage, tears blurred her vision, but they weren't from pain. They were from release. 2 weeks later, the company walls no longer felt like prisons. A new plaque gleamed outside the research wing. In honor of Keisha Williams, visionary, builder, truth teller. Keisha walked past it every morning, coffee in hand, wearing her new badge. Senior Innovation Advisor. No mop, no gloves, just purpose. The whispers had faded into respect. Even those who once mocked her now greeted her with quiet admiration. She didn't need apologies. She had proof. At her desk, she adjusted the small photo frame of Zuri, holding up a homemade robot. The caption scribbled in pencil read, "Mama says we build truth." Her phone buzzed. An email from Ethan. Subject, Open Design Form approved. Message, "Your idea to let every worker pitch inventions, janitors and engineers, starts next Monday. Let's build the future right this time." Keisha smiled faintly. "About time," she murmured. That evening, she rode the bus home as the city lights shimmered through the window. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Outside, children played in the warm streetlight, and one of them was Zuri, her laughter carrying like music through the evening air. "Mama, guess what?" the girl shouted as Keisha stepped off the bus. "What, baby?" "Our robot won first place. The judges said it learns faster than the others." Keisha crouched, tears brimming, just like its creator. Zuri grinned wide. "No, Mama, just like you." They walked home hand in hand, the night calm, the world a little fairer than before. Inside, Keisha placed her old notebook on the kitchen shelf, not hidden, not locked away. It stayed there, open the first page, next to Zuri's signed trophy. The two legacies side by side, past and future, pain and triumph. She exhaled softly, the weight finally gone. "We did it, baby," she whispered. The truth finally got its voice. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like the beginning of something new. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.